Welcome to CBR's Dynamic Duos. I'm Tiffany Crivelli, and we have an extremely special episode, one that I'm thrilled to share with you. This episode features directors Kemp Powers and Joaquim Santos, two of the three directors of Sony's SpiderMan Across the Spider-Verse, the eagerly awaited sequel to Into the Spider-Verse. During this conversation, Kemp and Joaquim dive into some comics talk, revealing the first comics they read. And they talk about how Across the Spider-Verse isn't just more of the same but bigger. This sequel takes a different approach from Into the Spider-Verse to give fans a fresh experience. So, if you're as excited as I am for Sony's Across the Spider-Verse, then I think you're going to love this episode of Dynamic Duos.
What's up, Joaquim? Or is it Joaquim? Come on, tell everyone how to properly pronounce your name.
All right, I'm going to give you the whole kit and caboodle here. So it's Joaquim Christie, which is my mother's maiden name. Araña, which is my middle name, and our family crest is the spider, ironically. Trindade, which is Trinity, and dos Santos, which is of saints, Trinity of Saints.
Say it
Joaquim Christie, Araña, Trindade, dos Santos. There it is.
Nice. I love Portuguese.
It is funny. It's like to hear it from afar. Sometimes I'll hear like Russian people speaking. I'm like, are they speaking? No, they're not. Okay, it's close.
Yeah,
it's got like similar tones, but it's a confusing word. What about you? What's the full Kemp Powers name?
It's Kemp Willis Powers. Kemp Willis Powers.
Yeah. I like it.
And unfortunately I'm a Gen Xer, so the sheer number of times people would go, "What you talking about, Willis?" Growing up, my middle name. So, but you know, I endured largely thanks to comic books. You know, that's the funny thing is that like, you know, it's so weird to be of that generation where comic books are like music. It's just like it's always been in the foreground. It's always been in the background. We were having a conversation earlier today. Remember, like, isn't it crazy how the two things the two big firsts I can remember were like the first album I bought with my own money and the first comic book I bought with my own money. You know, the album was Big Daddy Kane's Long Live the King, FYI. And it was two comics in one day. I remember it because I bought them at Brain Damage Comics in Brooklyn, New York. This dude named Carlos ran the shop. It was near my elementary school. I was 9 years old. It was Wolverine #2 by Chris Claremont and Frank Miller. And it was X-Men Annual #6, also written by Chris Claremont, with art by Bill Sienkiewicz, who ended up becoming those ended up being two of my favorite artists and one of my all-time favorite writers in comic books. And it was just like a matter of literally weeks from buying those first comic books to being like up to my neck in Spider-Man.
Oh my gosh, man.
You know, like, what about you?
Yeah,
like, what were your...
It's funny that you should say that because the comic book store. So I had a couple comic book stores growing up. I was lucky. I grew up in the Valley, so comic book stores, you know, they went through their sort of rise and fall, and they would come and go. But we had a lot to pick and choose from. But one of the ones that stuck around for a long time was a place called Visual Addiction, and it was on Ventura Boulevard, and it was a CD trader / comic book store. So it was literally those two things together. It was music and comics together. But I remember my first two albums that I bought were Appetite for Destruction and Are You Gonna Go My Way, Lenny Kravitz. And then first comic was Torment, Spider-Man's Torment. And I mean, we literally were just talking about this, but I have this funny experience because I found in some, you know, you're a kid, this was all pre-internet. I don't even know that it was like Craigslist. It must have been like a LA Trader. I don't know what the heck it was, but I found, you know, an ad for somebody that was selling comics at like decent prices. Because in the comic book stores, Torment was going for huge money.
Yeah.
And I called up this number, and he was like, "Yeah, $25." I was like, so that was like all the money that I had on me ever, that I had amassed over, you know. And we met at the Burger King. That's literally the Burger King that Marty McFly skates by when he's leaving Doc Brown's house. And he sold me the comic. And looking at it now, I would never allow my kid to go alone to like a fast food chain to meet a full-blown adult to sell him comic books. But that was the era.
It was a different time for sure, man. I mean, it's so crazy. Like by the time this conversation airs, I guess it will probably be like a couple of days before Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse comes out. And I don't know about you, but like, do I know I've got like a safe house planned out in case people don't enjoy this film as much as we hope they. I don't know if you've already got like a go bag packed and like planning to.
I've already done the thing where I just, once we put anything, whether it's a trailer or anything, I just shut off for a little bit. I don't do it. It's like a bubble where I don't want to know either way, because I don't want it to inflate me and get my expectations too high. And I don't want it to bum me out and put me into a spiral.
Well, you've had a lot of experience with like franchises too, because I mean, you did Voltron, which is just. And look, I'm going to be full disclosure. I've never said this to you, but I was that weird kid as a kid who preferred the cars over the lions. I know. I actually like this. I know. I was that weird. I know. I was that weird kid, man, that people were just like, how do you not like the lions more than the cars? And I'm like, for those listening, cars is the spaceships, but they look like cars. Right. But I was always like, well, there's just 5 with the lion, and it's like they're in space. I just feel like the cars, you're less lonely. Like you can
got
date.
Like an entire
you know what I mean? Like
you.
There's so many pilots. You can like have a social events. You can date, and it doesn't feel incestuous.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I was actually being super logical about putting myself in the world, living in the world of Voltron.
You quickly run into
that
like
was the world I got to live in.
That's hilarious. You brought it to the real world.
I really did. And that's what I do with comics. I mean, look, man, that's why I think Spider-Man is probably the most popular comic book character in history, because we can relate to Spider-Man more than any other character. I mean, for me, it was literal because Spider-Man lived in New York and I lived in New York, So I'm reading these comic books and I'm seeing landmarks of places that I was in Brooklyn. So the city, Manhattan, was a place that was like far enough away that you saw it out your window, but you only go there.
It's super interesting that you say that, man, because, I grew up, I was born in Portugal, but moved here, to LA when I was pretty young, man. So literally like my version of New York was through Spider-Man comics. Like that's how I hear like Stan Lee's voice over like imagery of New York. I will say like there's sort of like, there was a tropey element that sort of happened. You'd always see like, oh, these thugs are like shaking down somebody in a back alley and they got like a bat with like a nail in it. And it was like, it seemed almost like the Warriors or something like that, which by the way, I love the Warriors.
Love the Warriors
but
too.
Like, what was the reality? What was like you were reading the comics, you were living in the environment the comics were sort of based on. Was there a disconnect there, or were you like, no, this is
no, the reality of New York in the 80s was probably closer to what your nightmare, like the nightmare comic version than I'd care to admit. Sure. But the reality is that like the subway was open 24 hours, but after dark, you didn't go down there because it would be you and the guys who were going to like rob you, basically. And, everything was covered in not just artistic graffiti, but it was like, scratch, it was a mess. The city was pretty poor in the 80s. It just come out of bankruptcy. It was like the crack epidemic. I mean, New York was a place that, in my opinion, I felt like only New Yorkers loved, but that also gave us this kind of like us against the world kind of mentality where you grow up in New York and the world hates you. And meanwhile, you can't imagine yourself being anywhere else. You know what I mean?
It was like the best chip on your shoulder. It was like the best.
Oh, it's what made the New York, and then more specifically Brooklyn Pride, were just like, I mean, I remember being a kid, like I wore a t-shirt that literally the t-shirt just had the name of my neighborhood on it. It just said like Flatbush. Like that's it. That was a shirt, and it was like bold for me to wear that shirt and get off the subway in another neighborhood. You know what I mean? Because it's just like sending up a flag. So, and again, like Spider-Man's like the kind of scrappy character that really represented that. So when I first learned about Miles Morales, man, I was just like, oh, this is so great. I wish I could be a kid again to be discovering this character, not discovering it as a middle-aged man who's got a kid of my own. But thankfully my kids, they did get to grow up with the Miles Moraleses and the Spider-Gwens of the world being normal, which is, I'm not going to lie, it's a big part of why I was kind of excited to become a part of this, because we come from really different backgrounds. Before we came into Spider-Verse, I had been writing plays and then getting into film and television and live action, and I was just off of my first animated feature, which was Disney Pixar's Soul.
That's right.
And people don't even realize that, like, I was working on Spider-Verse, Across the Spider-Verse, before Soul came out in theaters, like, because we wrapped and I was already on board. I got like approval from the Pixar folks to get to work on this film. I just couldn't promote to let anyone know, so it was like super duper secret.
I mean, you were coming into meetings on Spider-Verse literally saying like, hey, I'm good for like 45 minutes, then I got to go do this press thing for like 45 minutes, and I'm coming back in. And it was like, wow, he is in the middle of
promoting
it.
another. And it's crazy. Like, it's so weird. It's hard to squeeze a positive out of the COVID lockdown, but in a weird twist of fate, if not for COVID lockdown, I wouldn't have been able to do it. I would have, when Phil and Chris came to me and were like, yeah, are you interested in coming on board to direct a sequel? As much as I wanted to, I wouldn't have been able to, because I would have been physically traveling to promote Soul. But it's only because we were locked down and I was promoting it from the same table I'm sitting at right now. And we were also in production meetings at the same table in our homes, that I was able to kind of bridge the gap until we got back into the studio.
I remember having discussions whether, in the film we were going to sort of like address COVID and have people masked up. Like, we didn't know how long things were going to go. We had no idea if this was going to be the forever times.
It was. It's kind of surreal when you think back on it, and it's progressed so. I mean, it's so crazy, man. Like, seeing and making an animated film, the idea, you have this great idea and everyone's excited about it. Then you start making it, and there's a long period of time where nothing works. Nothing works, and you're just like, oh my God, is it ever gonna work? Is it ever gonna make sense? Is it ever going to be funny? Like, that's the thing that people don't get too. They're like, oh, well, it's Lord Miller, so everything is just a barrel of laughs. And it's like, these jokes don't work for a long time.
Or they work in the beginning, and then you tweak them. Then you
get sick of the joke.
And then you're like, this is not good, right? And we've just sat with it for anymore. 45 days straight, and you show it to fresh eyes and they're laughing. And you sort of get to relive the humor of it and the sort of the punchiness of it through these fresh eyes.
Yeah, man. The first time we did an audience screening, even though it was like the incomplete film, with lots of still like layout and rough animation, I can't tell you how much of a relief it was to finally have that first audience screening of the film and just sit there in a theater with like a few hundred people and just hear them laughing, and hear them like shit. It was, God, we needed it. We needed it so much.
Shot in the arm. It's sort of I don't want to say it's like vindication, but you spend a lot of time working these things out, and it becomes this weird Sisyphus thing that you're rolling up a hill. You don't know sort of where you're at anymore. You start questioning your own abilities, and then to see people react to it, you go like, oh my gosh, we're not crazy people.
Yeah. Because I mean, ultimately, man, like, I don't know about you, but like, I love original stories, and I like to try to tell the most original stories possible. And if the plan for this film was just to like do exactly what the first film did, but more, but bigger, I wouldn't have really been interested. What excited me was that they didn't want to repeat anything that they'd done before. That's what's actually exciting, because anyone who says that they were like looking forward to the first film and expected it to be that good is a liar.
I think that's really true.
Because they are, and the thing is, like, I feel like Into the Spider-Verse was a film that no one asked for. So I didn't want to fall into this trap where it's like, this is what people want. And it's like, people didn't know what they wanted until they've got it.
That's right.
And you know what I mean? Like,
no, I think you're absolutely right. I think, we're both old enough to sort of remember the before times. The before comic book films were essentially cinema as my kid knows it now. And so I went through this phase where it seemed to me like filmmakers were almost embarrassed of the source material. So they try to like
Yeah.
cover it up and hide it, or make everything so bleak, and everybody's got to be clad in like dark leathers, and you got to make it very brooding. And then it sort of went through this golden period where it was like, no, these are the biblical stories we want to tell, and we want to honor all the stuff that you grew up reading. And now we've seen, when I came on, when I first started talking about being on Spider-Verse, like there had been a lot of Spider-Man material out there. So I was one of those people, and I'm sort of, I'll gladly sort of wave this flag and say like, okay, I think all the Spider-Man stories have been told. My assumption was that we were going to go into like another Peter story. So when they said Miles Morales, I went, oh, okay, now I'm interested. We're here. We've got an opportunity to do something completely new. And I think the film really gave everybody permission on the sequel that we're working on, the first film, Into the Spider-Verse, to just sort of shuck convention, to sort of go against all these rules that have been established by fandom, essentially.
And I mean, see, I don't know about you, but like I wanted to see in this film a fully realized Miles. Like the journey of the first one was so great, but it was truly like an ensemble where it's like, Peter B is a tremendous, and it's like this time it's like we do a jump in time in this film. Miles has had a growth spurt. I was so excited to get a chance to tell the story where Miles is a fully realized, competent Spider-Man. You know what I mean? Because that's a key thing with this. It's like you have all these spider people from different worlds, and it's like everyone has to accept and believe that this person on their own is single-handedly the Spider-Man protecting their city. And that can't happen if Miles still stays in like the barely competent, role that he was, which was wonderful for the first film. So it's like in a world where Miles is a fully realized, fully competent, fully capable Spider-Man, what kind of story can we tell that's equally as compelling as that first one?
That origin story.
Still like centering him in this family, because he's so unique, man. He's got both parents at home. Man, Aunt May doesn't care what Peter Parker's up to.
She has no clue.
She has no clue and doesn't need to have a clue. Miles has helicopter parents. You know what I mean? Like his dad's a cop, for Christ's sake. Like he's his mom is like his best friend. So I don't know, man. Like that's pretty exciting to kind of like, okay, what is the fully realized version of Miles where he's not a mentee anymore?
That's right.
What kind of film is that?
And not chickening out on that idea, because I think one thing that's really important is that it comes across the first moment that you see him. Anybody who's married or related to a filmmaker has this little inside track as to like what the film, how it's shaping up. If I'm looking at a cut at home, my wife will come in and then she'll watch the scene down with me. And it's really cool to hear her take, because it's sort of that fresh eye, or my son's take. And the thing that she noticed, that both of them noticed actually, was they both said a version of like, oh, he's figured it out. Look, Miles, he's figured it out, because it's down to the way he moves. It's down to the way he reacts to situations. It's down to how he's able to sort of vacillate between Miles and Spider-Man and sort of go back and forth and keep those, plates spinning. So the fact that they can come in for 2 minutes, look at a scene and understand that Miles has evolved, to me was starting to tell me, oh, we're doing something right.
Yeah, man, you got to feel, the audience has to feel comfortable with the idea of every spider person being someone who's watching their back and protecting their safety. And I think that's like that was really an important place to be at from the very beginning of the film. The other challenging element of this, of course, is that, we learn so much more about Gwen as well. And Gwen is almost, Gwen is really the co-lead, and it's people they'll find out when they see this, but like, our story opens on Gwen. I think that's common knowledge already, but it's like her friendship, her relationship towards Miles, like that was always one of the most compelling elements of the first film, and I really think I'm really happy with the evolution of the story that we go into with this one. I mean, of course, the technical elements of it the animation that everyone talks about in the first film. Similarly, like, you don't want to just tell the same story but bigger. I think the production team, and Justin's not here, but the third director, Justin Thompson, who was the production designer on the first film, they don't want to repeat their work either.
That's right.
So I think that it was like, okay, one thing we don't want to do is have this film look just like that film we just made, and talk about like taking on most people say an unnecessary challenge, but man, do I think that the team passed it with flying colors, man.
Yeah. There's a MMA fighter that has this quote that I find hilarious, and he says it's super necessary, and I think for them it was super necessary. The sort of like most basic conceit here that is the idea that if the first film was about these characters sort of invading Miles' space, he's now doing the exact opposite. So he's this sort of singular element that's out in all these various different places. And what does that mean? I remember we had hours and hours of conversation alone, around the idea of like, how much of the world does Miles take on when he travels into somebody else's space?
Yes.
And does he take on degrees of it? Exactly. Does he give himself visually wholeheartedly to that world? That is like something that on screen you may not really even pick up on, but it's debated ad nauseum for, what feels like time eternal with the filmmakers, because it's very, very important.
Yeah, man. So I guess we better wrap this up now. So I'm sure people are curious about this thing, but like Easter eggs are a big part, I think, of any animated film. And, everyone's encouraged, from the story artists to the animators to the directors and the producers, to put little kind of things that are important to them into the film. And I'm just curious. I know I've got one or two, and I'm just curious, like, is there anything that you are pretty excited about? It might even be like one of those blink and you miss it, or you're guaranteed to miss it, little things you popped into the film.
Boy, it's with this film, it's almost too big a question to ask. But I will say there's a couple for me. So I think one is with this project in particular, but every project that, I'm fortunate enough to work on, I secretly try to work with people that I absolutely loved as a fan growing up. So the opportunity to work with comic book artists that were huge influences to me, and have the hand of the artist on screen. So working with both Rick Leonardi and Brian Stelfreeze for me, that's a huge Easter egg. It's like something I never thought I'd get to say. Both lending their skills to Brian with sort of figuring out the look of Jessica Drew.
Right.
And Rick, who, essentially, like, there is no 2099 without Rick. Seeing Rick's inking and having him take passes over the character to sort of fuse that look with this concept of him living in a world that's very conceptual, based on like the art of Ron Cobb and Sid Mead. Yeah. That's the synthesis there is like, that to me is like the artist's Easter egg.
Totally. And there's a lot of those artists. I mentioned Bill Sienkiewicz at the beginning, and Bill Sienkiewicz came in and did some design work for some poster concepts.
Yes.
So just inviting the whole comic book world in here. For me, my Easter eggs they're little moments in the film. A couple of them as well. One of them, when before Miles goes out across the Spider-Verse, so to speak, when he's still in his world, he's wearing a basketball jersey. Yeah. And obviously I'm a New Yorker, lifelong suffering New York Knicks fan. I've been known to even insert a Knicks joke or two into other things like Soul. And for this one, I couldn't resist another little, because Miles's universe is not our universe.
Yes.
And we decided to make, in his world, the Knicks are the Brooklyn Knicks. So his jersey is Knicks colors, but it says Brooklyn. And then on the back of the jersey, for the player name, it says Sham God. Now, if you're like a hardcore basketball New York person, there's this guy named Sham God, who was a playground legend, who didn't really play in the NBA very long.
Yeah.
But he is notable for having like one of the best crossover dribbles that anyone's ever had. It was such an amazing crossover dribble. it inspired the crossover dribble. It's called the Sham God Crossover.
Love it.
And you'll see it. NBA players, you'll see Steph Curry. You've seen a million NBA players do this dribble that is known as the Sham God. And it's one of those ankle-breaking dribbles that you only do when you are dominating your opponent, and it's humiliating. It embarrassing. But the God Sham God only had a very short NBA career. So in my mind, in my imagination, in Miles's world, God Sham God was the all-star Hall of Fame player for the Brooklyn Knicks.
I love it.
Miles's jersey says Sham God on the back, and you only see it in like a couple of frames in his bedroom when he gets up from his bed. Do you see the Sham God on the back? And that's kind of like,
there is a reality where that happens.
Yeah, there's an homage to one of the all-time playground basketball New York greats.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful, man.
That was fun, man.
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
All right, let's get back to finishing this film now, huh?
Yeah, let's finish this movie up so we can rest.
I want to thank Kemp and Joaquim for making such a great episode. And don't forget, if you want to check out Sony's SpiderMan Across the Spider-Verse, it opens in theaters on June 2nd, and you can buy tickets right now. If you have a minute before you head off, please rate and review this podcast. And as always, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time on Dynamic Duos.